So welcome everyone to our weekly call. As you would have heard, hopefully with an announcement on your device, we are now recording the call, so do bear that in mind. The main topic of conversation for our call today, which we'll come on to in a moment, will be the Mozilla TRR public consultation response. I've invited for that a few people who had submitted responses, some of whom will often join these calls anyway, others who haven't. So it will be slightly random who actually sort of shares their thoughts on their response, depending on who was able to join the call. But I thought as the list had just appeared, it was worth just picking up on that. But before we dive into just people sharing those responses, let me just briefly share my screen, if I can see the right screen to share, which I can't. Let me just see why that is. No, I see why. Right.
Okay, don't share the one where you're talking to Stockbroker was saying sell, sell, sell. It's too hot. Global warming's here, and I'm running away.
Yeah, that would be a bit unfortunate, wouldn't it, to do that? Right, let me do that again. Now I can see the right screen. Right, so yeah, as I said, we're talking about the sort of public consultation responses. Just by way of background, before we dive into the detail, if you can see the screen, the conclusion so far from Mozilla, and this is just lifted from the blog post. I'll put a link to the blog post on the slide. They had quite a few comments from people about the implications of publishing block lists and the wisdom of doing that. So at least for now, you'll see that they have relaxed the block list publication requirement. So that's not currently sort of needed. Now, whether that becomes a permanent arrangement, I think remains to be seen. But that's, if you like, so far the one concrete outcome of the public consultation for any participants in the TRR program, that is. If in terms of next steps, again, this is lifted from the relevant part of the blog post, which essentially says discussions are continuing and there will be further updates in the coming months. So what hasn't been provided yet is any analysis by Mozilla of the sort of total sort of responses, and then some indication of what they're going to do to, if anything, to act on those, other than purely relaxing the block list requirement for now. And then finally, on this topic, in terms of the consultation responses themselves, there were a grand total of 57 responses. It was very tempting to put a picture of a baked bean tin on here, but I resisted that. But you'll see the so all the various organizations that responded, and if you're interested in those, the link at the bottom will take you through to this list, and indeed there are then links through to each of the individual responses, should you be interested in reading the details of say what Martin Huneck put in his response. From an early and very high level analysis, there was quite a range of responses, some of which were a small number of sentences in lengths, others were quite a few pages, and quite a mix of views as to whether the sort of TRR program was on balance a good or a bad thing, whether DOE was good or bad, etc. So I think pleasingly, they did represent a good cross-section of views. But obviously what will be of interest will be what Mozilla sort of draws out from those responses and chooses to act upon. So that's what we'll no doubt see in due course. And I should say I have reached out to the Mozilla team and at the point where they're ready to be more specific. I've said there's a open invitation to come back on the call and talk about their analysis and conclusions. So hopefully we'll get that in due course. Okay, so that's just by way of background, just to remind you. So let me just remove that. So as I said, I sort of reached out to a cross section of those responses, again, trying to contact people representing a variety of views rather than just all that had sort of broadly similar conclusions. So I'm hoping that sort of amongst those people on the call, what we're about to do now is to maybe just tease out some of the themes from those responses and then to sort of see where the discussion sort of leads us over the next little while. So I will sort of randomly go to some of the people who I reached out to previously to see if there's anything that they want to sort of amplify from their response. And since I can see him actually on camera, Paul, I think you were sort of keen to talk about your response. So do you want to sort of kick off and just amplify the main points in it as you see fit?
Sure, although the word keen may have different meaning where you come from, I am willing.
Willing.
Yes. So I said there what I've said here, which is that the opt-out problem gives me some, the opt-out position gives me some heartburn. There is no other aspect of my life where someone I choose to do some kind of business or operation with would get a chance to tell me, look, Vixie, we don't know who your friends are, but we're afraid that you've chosen bad friends. And so we're going to choose for you. And after we've made that choice, we're going to give you an opportunity to say, oh, no, please, go back to the previous way. That is never okay. It would not be okay if it was, I don't know, a mother trying to choose a wife for a son. It would not be, it's just not okay. And I've tried pretty hard and I cannot get over it. So that's more or less, I didn't use that example, but that's more or less what my remarks were. And so I probably represent a fence post. I don't think anyone is more extremely opposed to the TRR program than I am. And it has nothing to do with the requirements of being a TRR and everything to do with the fact that the changes being made without informed consent, without any consent, getting post facto consent almost qualifies this as prior restraint, and I won't have it.
Yeah, and I know, Paul, you posted recently your thoughts on opt-in versus opt-out, and whether, in fact, I think opt-out is a contradiction in terms, I think, to very briefly summarize a much longer post, but which is obviously completely consistent with the position you just outlined. And what we'll do then, I'm going to sort of flip to different people that responded. If anyone has any questions and wants to jump in, I should have said probably earlier, feel free to raise your hand on Zoom or pop something in the chat, and then I'll sort of interrupt and go to you before we move on to the sort of next speaker. But otherwise, we'll sort of move around different people. before I move on to the next person, Mark has sort of taken my cue on that. So do you want to come in first then, Mark?
Sure. Just a quick question, Paul. I totally understand your position on the opt-out or opt-in, but do you think there's users really have provided consent for their current DNS settings? So I would, contend that most people using DNS, 95% would have no idea what they're set to and how they were set, and did they really opt into those settings?
I don't think informed consent was a norm, was a pre-TRR norm. On the other hand, he hit me first is not one of the things I have ever let one of my children tell me was their justification for hitting someone. And so I'm just not going to resonate well to both sides do it or anything like that. So you have to, what you have to account for when you're making a change like this is, are your actions moral in and of themselves, not in the context of what someone else may have done before you? And so let's look at the cases. Let's enumerate. If someone has DNS settings that maybe they weren't, they didn't give informed consent, but their sysadmin did, their corporate IT administrator did, their parent did, their MSSP did. And so they've got some configuration that, it's a blizzard of complexity. Most people have no idea what the heck is going on inside their laptop. And it wouldn't just be DNS, it would be everything. But you have to enumerate the possibility that a lot of that has been set up for them. For example, they may not even have the root password or administrator password. They couldn't change their DNS at the system level. They lack the privileges to do so. And that is what is best, what's been chosen by maybe them and their children who help them with IT issues, or them and their employer, or what have you. That may not be something they made a conscious, deliberate, well-informed choice about. They may not even get a choice, but it was still their situation. You can't just reach in and presume that we know better and that we're going to make a change, and then we're going to give you a kind of misleading as well as content-free message about what's been done supposedly on their behalf. You just can't do that. That is, and there would be other reasons beyond the ones that I gave in the Mozilla response, and I don't want to dominate the conversation here. But to give you an example, the signals which emanate from us through our platforms are in some cases useless until aggregated. But once they get out there, then various parties are able to do various things with them. And some of those things may be done by people's interests, whose interests are aligned with ours, and Mozilla would qualify. They are of good heart. Others might not be. It might be surveillance capitalism, whatever. So when I see a change to what signals emanate from me or from my users, my employees, my family, whatever, when I see that change and I see that it's being driven in ignorance of whatever the choice was before, it doesn't matter to me whether there was consent before or not. Those signals must not be changed absent informed consent. So I'm sorry to keep coming back to that, but that's the thing. Well, let me give you an example. So something that a friend of mine from the Configure white paper, we got together recently to mark the passage of Kaminsky, who was one of our co-authors there. And somebody said, you know, on this DOH thing, back in the day when, let's say, Microsoft with Windows 95 was kind of really building their empire and really growing, they got sued for antitrust because they integrated components of the browser into the operating system. And that meant that whatever it was, Microsoft Internet Explorer was somehow a better browser than, you know, let's use Firefox or Mozilla as an example. And that just seemed like it was a big antitrust problem, and they got sued and they got forced to make some changes. So let's imagine that at that time, Microsoft had said, look, we are a better DNS provider, or we know of a better DNS provider than whatever you probably have right now. And so when you switch to Windows 95, it is not, it's going to set your DNS the way we want it to be. It's going to ignore your corporate, it's going to ignore your family, it's going to ignore your ISP, it's going to ignore everything. Microsoft knows what is best for you in terms of your DNS provider. I want every one of you to try to imagine not being a part of the rage-filled, torch-bearing mob who would have launched on Microsoft headquarters if they had not said then what Mozilla is saying now. Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying. That helps. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark, for the question. And I think, Andreas, you also raised your hand.
Yeah, I'm also a little concerned actually about this opt-out concept, because if you look into other things, especially happening in the European Union, you find some similarities. In the past, nobody were really aware what a cookie is about, right? And all of a sudden in Europe, a new regulation popped up, and now everybody who runs a website using cookies has to inform the user about which type of cookies are in use, what would these cookies mean to be used for, and so on and so on. And the user has to actively opt in for any cookie use he does not explicitly need to opt into for running the service. And especially for European countries, this kind of opt-in model would be much more appreciated for customers than the opt-out model, especially because in this case, one of the main reasons why Mozilla came up with a TRR idea is to improve privacy, which in return also for European countries is not that much of an issue like for other countries in the world, where we have maybe much higher privacy misuse on DNS level. So that's why, just for sake of consistency for the customer, we should also for sure be more in favor for an opt-in model, because that's especially what all the European customers got used to, right? They got the choice, they will be informed, they can take an informed decision to either opt in or to keep the default, which is off. That's why I would also definitely say the opt-in would be a much better option than the opt-out. There's out of many other criticism you can put on the TRR, but just my 2 cents on the opt-out versus opt-in.
Yeah, thanks, Andreas. Right, let me move on then. I think, yes, Ross Krulman kindly agreed to join from Etno. He had the misfortune of being on Paolo's out of office response. So, Ross, I don't know whether you're in a position where you can comment on Etno's response to the Mozilla consultation. So if you can't, that's completely understood, but I think it was certainly worth asking if you're able just to maybe call out some of the highlights from the response.
Absolutely, thanks Andrew. And indeed, I may not be in a position to give such great detail, but I can certainly point you in the direction of our response. And an important thing to bear in mind with our response is that, I mean, we generally are supportive of the direction that Mozilla decided to go in. That said, we decided to, instead of answering the consultation in the prescriptive way that was open to us, we did simply resubmit to Mozilla for their information our existing position paper on the DNS over HTTPS on the DOH, which indeed you can find. I trust it's publicly available on the Mozilla page now, but it's also on our website. I don't have a good view of the most concerning points, but that's certainly just to give an indication of how we responded. We responded in the sense to make it clear that this is an important and serious issue for us, but indeed we didn't go into the direction. We didn't follow the direction of the questions posed by Mozilla.
Yeah.
So I hope that's I hope our modus operandi is clear, and indeed the position paper is available in several places.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ross, and that's helpful to have that understanding of how you approached it, which is always useful. So appreciate that, and thank you for coming on at short notice, which is also much appreciated. Well, in which case, let me then move on. I know Article 19 submitted a response, and in fact, I think Joey, you were the main author, or possibly the only author of the Article 19 response. So, is there anything you particularly want to call out from that response you think would be worth highlighting? Absolutely,
collaboration. We tried to make a strong case on trying to use multi-sided or multi-stakeholder collaboration in order to address several of the main points. For example, even for antitrust, we really think that working across different sectors, like for example on a panel similar to the IEGF DOE panel that we had, where we brought industry representatives, where we brought civil society representatives, and just hash out some of the issues that people have in an open way, that helps. And in other areas, for example, for documentation, for informed consent, for lots of these things, I wrote like 3 pages, and I was on leave until today. So to be completely honest, I don't recall most of the other points that I tried to make. But yes, we called Mozilla on trying to make more open collaboration to address lots of other things. But thank you for sharing the links and everything. Everything is there. If anybody would like to, I don't know, approach us with concerns, or if you agree with any of our points or anything, everything like that would be very welcome.
Perfect. Thanks, Joey, and well done if it was if you've been on holiday, because yeah, in fairness, I should have said, just as a reminder, the consultation period closed, some of you may or may not recall, on the 20th of January. So it is a fair while ago when we all drafted our responses. And I've just posted a link to the responses in the chat for anyone that hasn't yet had a chance to click on those. So you, as you saw from my slide, you can then link through to any of the responses that are publicly available. Thank you for that, Joey, though. That was helpful. Now, I know also that Nominet responded. I know we got both Neil and Brett on the call. Perhaps if I come to Neil first and ask, again, sort of same question as with others, is there anything from your response you think it might be particularly interesting to mention?
Yeah, hi, Andrew. Good afternoon. I'll probably pass most of it to Brett. I think it probably echoes a number of things that have been said already about responsible adoption, better informed user consent, bearing in mind other regarding safety and geographical accountabilities of what options are there. But maybe Brett wants to expand on some of those within the document. I did have some input, as did Brett and others at Nominet, with the response to make sure it was it was balanced across obviously a number of people that are involved in the industry. So rather than me go into each one that is there, Brett, is there anything specific that you feel we should call out?
I think as usual, my advancing years, I mean, I'd forgotten what our response was until I read it literally 5 minutes before the meeting, because it was quite a while ago now. But I've made a few notes, and I can very briefly go through the highlights of what our response were. And I don't think any of this will be a surprise, but it might be some points that we haven't already touched on. The first ones are obvious, and they agree with what Paul was saying, which was don't turn on DOH by default. This needs to be opt-in by the user, and users must understand what they're signing up to, because it's common sense really. We put some notes in that it might be a good idea to do some kind of standardization across browsers and how they operate DOH, and the terminology they use to make it easier for users, so they're not looking at one thing in Chrome and looking at a different thing in Firefox, for instance. We also mentioned that rollout of DOH must ensure equal or improved safety for users, so don't break any existing legitimate blocking methods that are already in place that might be protecting users by turning on DOH. Mozilla should clarify what it means by what means it will ensure compliance with local law enforcement agencies, because they stated they would be in compliance, but didn't say how they would actually do that. We also mentioned the obvious need to be aware and mindful of the implications of centralizing DNS traffic to a small number of TRRs. So, if they're going to operate TRRs, it should be a wide range, not Cloudflare and Google, and that's it, or something, or for example. And lastly, one of the things that we were supportive of, something that Mozilla did, was put some security controls in place for enterprise environments, so that enterprise environments have ways of controlling the turn on and turn off of DOH in enterprise environments. So things like being able to control the settings for DOH in Firefox by things like group policy and or the canary domain thing that they put in place. So it was just to emphasize that was a good thing, and they should continue doing that kind of thing. And that really was the highlights of our response.
Okay, thanks, Neil and Paul. And I don't see any questions that come up of late. So,
as I said, I don't think there was anything controversial there. So.
Well, we'll find out when we get the analysis, won't we? But yeah, fair enough. And I can see whilst we've been talking, Mark has unfortunately had to drop off, but he mentioned that Cira will join the TRR program starting next month. So so Cira, as a reminder, operates the Canadian Shield, so open resolver. I guess that's hot off the press, effectively, that there'll be a new addition to the list any time now. Then, yeah, starting in July, so it could be as early as the latter part of this week. But he has commented he would also prefer opt-in. Just picking up on one of the earlier points.
I know that Mozilla turned it on by default in some parts of North America. Did that apply to Canada as well?
I thought it was just the US, and I'm seeing if anyone on the list concurs with that or says differently. Paul, looks like you might have something to say on that. Paul, do you want to come on?
That's not reliably knowable, so the question has no meaning.
Fair point. Yeah, I think the intent, the stated intent, was the US to begin with, is my recollection, and no one's violently disagreeing with that as a stated intent. But I take Paul's point that actually implementation is less straightforward than that. Okay, let me just check to see who else is on. I think yes, I see. So Nick Lehman is on from Deutsche Telekom. Nick, is there anything you want to mention about Deutsche Telekom's response that hasn't come up so far that you think will be useful?
Yeah, I mean, most of the stuff I think was already said. So I also see the main issue is really the question whether it's an opt-in or opt-out. Because if it's basically an opt-out, that would mean for us that you change a default. And changing a default might result also, say, in problems with existing products and so on. So that's the main issue we see. Besides that, I don't think that there were really additional larger issues in the policy itself. So for instance, around questions like publishing block lists and stuff like that, I think that, I mean, there was also a change, I think. So that looked okay, but yeah, as mentioned, the main issue is really the opt-in, opt-out question, because that really could cause problems. It's not so much a question about, say, privacy and stuff like that. It's really also a question how many hotline calls you have, how do you do debugging, what happens to products if the customer expects that the product works, but default DNS was changed, so things like that.
Yeah, the thorny issue of customer service definitely is worth considering. Yeah. Okay. Well, yes, thank you then for highlighting that. Yeah, that is a different angle. It hasn't come up thus far. I'm just seeing if anyone else who I'd previously communicated with who'd sort of seemed willing to share their thoughts. I think I've come to everyone that I'd reached out to in advance. Is there anyone that I've either missed, in which case apologies, but do sort of join the conversation, or equally for that matter, anyone that I didn't reach out to that wants to mention something from their response that hasn't already come up, in which case do feel free to again unmute or put your hand up as you prefer. Hi, Gianpaolo. Looks like you're, yeah.
So from Wolfram response, our main concern are about the topology where concentrated DNS could reduce the resiliency of the service, and from the fact that in Europe we operate a regulated market. So many of the requests are in contrast with what the regulator says. So the line of the response goes in this direction, as we have legal obligations to keep the logs for a certain period of time to perform blocks, and we receive the blocking list without having the possibility to see what is included. So it goes in this direction, and the TRR approach goes in a different way. Then regarding product, it goes in a direction to disrupt an existing market. So if a customer has already opted into a service, with the automatic opt-in to TRR, the service will be disrupted, and the customer will not be aware of why the existing service is no more working.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gianpaolo. Of course, I don't think I can see either Bill or John Todd on the call, but that shamelessly allows me to just reference. I'm sure most of you will have noted that Sony has recently launched a court case through the German courts to require Quad 9 to block access to some copyright infringing sites. I mentioned that just in the context of Gianpaolo referencing sort of local legislative requirements. So that does look like that's becoming a thing, certainly within Europe, with some of the legislators and regulators beginning to consider open resolvers in the context of adherence to national legislation. which I think is something which is worth tracking over the coming weeks and months to see how that develops. Did you want to come in on that, Brett, or?
Sorry, Andrew, I was elsewhere for a second.
Oh, it's all right. You're not poised to say something.
No, I was reading something else.
Fair enough. No worries. Okay. Yeah. Well, in that case, yeah. Thanks for that, Gianpaolo. Again, if anyone else had any other different insights that came out of their responses that they feel it's worth mentioning, I'll give you a moment to come off mute if you wish to.
Well, Andrew Glenn here. Hi.
Hi, Glenn.
Let me split one hair. I believe that the case with Quad 9, so you referenced sort of legislative, that's a court case, which I think Sony brought, and so it's a court decision versus a legislative.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And the only reason I split that hair, because I'm not trying to call you out, because look, these things blend into each other very easily. But it's important, I think, as part, and this is, I think, reflected a lot of the comments that ended up in the TRR responses, was that, this is a very complex environment. And the discussion of, why, when, how, do you disclose, do you not disclose, doesn't necessarily have a simple, nice, canned answer like the TRR original proposal would like to define. It's very complex across a number of different jurisdictions, a lot different courts, and it's hard to navigate, especially for engineers, even engineers that dabble in policy, because there is teams of people that spend their whole lives around this space, and it's very hard for us to create technical documents, and especially user documents, that mesh with it nicely. And so I think some advice has been, this is going to play out. Let's try not to create like a parallel effort within the technical world. Let's let that process play out politically. Civil society's involved, other parts, companies are involved. Let it play out, and then we'll respond as appropriate. I guess what I'm trying to say is we'll follow versus lead.
Yeah, which I think is a wise approach to this, because it is, as you rightly say, Glenn, complex.
Well, I'm done for today. If I've done something wise this early in the morning, then I'm just going
to just go home, or you're home. Just log off for the rest of the day. Quit while you're ahead. But no, I think that is a point well made. Lots of moving parts on this. Okay, last chance for anyone else to come on if you wish. Yeah, Paul, do you want to come back on?
I don't want to sort of praise by faint condemnation. So let me be clear that DOH, separately from the policies of the TRR program, DOH itself is highly controversial. And if we were to have a broader conversation about it, then it turns out that applications doing DNS is itself not settled policy. It's certainly a change which can be imposed with great success on the internet ecosystem, but it is not something I wish to be seen as comfortable with, even though for the purpose of today's conversation, I am remarking specifically about how Mozilla is deploying it. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a fair point. We have glossed over plenty of other sort of technical and policy questions in order to focus on the TRR specifically. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And there was quite an interesting post. I'm just trying to see if I can sort of spy. Yes, Mark Nottingham did a blog post about standardization of the next layer of the internet the other day, which I put in the weekly sort of headlines, which if anyone hasn't read, I think is well worth a look. And thanks to Chris Box for passing that on to me. Again, I've put that in the chat if you have a few minutes and haven't caught up with it, it's worth taking a look at just to see some of the different complexities there. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing those thoughts. I hope over the next few days, it might take me a bit into next week sometime, to do a fairly sort of lightweight analysis of some of the key points coming out of the various responses. So if that looks feasible, then I'll share that maybe in a week to 2 weeks. To save you all from having to read through 57 responses. Although if you do that before I get to and want to share your analysis, that will be even better. But yeah, because I think that will be a useful thing to do. Right, just one other thing I wanted to share as we move, therefore, seamlessly into any other business, which I will put again on the screen. Amongst many other things that I'm no doubt happening this week, it is the week of Eurodig 2021. Technically, it started today with day 0, but the two sort of primary days are Tuesday and Wednesday. As it's Eurodig, it runs in European time, clearly, just for the avoidance of doubt. I've highlighted a handful of sessions from within the program which caught my eye for various reasons. There's a sort of 2 full days of activity with 3 or 4 parallel sessions at any given time. So this is by no means an exhaustive agenda, and if you have a moment, it's well worth looking at the agenda. But you'll see I've called out sort of 4 of which happen to be tomorrow. The sort of workshop 1 on digital services regulation, which I thought may well appeal to people. I can especially recommend the next session, workshop 5, Crypto Wars 3. Can privacy, security, and encryption coexist? Which I'm shamelessly recommending, as I'm one of the people guilty for helping to coordinate the speakers for that. So we've got a good range of speakers, including sort of on the one hand, the Internet Society and Stephen Farrell, sort of nominally for the sort of technical community, but on the other hand, people like Eurodig, the IWF, sorry, not Eurodig, sorry, Europol even, and the IWF, and a sort of German regulator, and also CDT. So that should be a lively discussion. And then sort of 2 others tomorrow, 1 on copyright, workshop 6. And then finally, 1 on content moderation and censorship. So there's a few there amongst many others, which is well worth looking out for. And then I only picked out 1 on Wednesday, which is on the NIS2 directive and the European Commission cybersecurity agenda, which I suspect will have some very interesting content. That's obviously a somewhat longer focus session you'll see we're running through on Wednesday. So as I say, there are lots of other sessions. Those were the ones that caught my eye, but it's, as always, it's free to attend, but you just need to register in advance. And they're also using GatherTown. So those of you that attended the last couple of IETF events will be very familiar with the user experience. And you attend the sessions by going into GatherTown and then walking into the relevant studio for each session. So I think it's slightly more integrated, or at least that's the plan, than IETF 110 was. So definitely worth a look if you have the time to do that. And that was pretty much it from me, I think. So does anyone else have anything else you think it will be useful to share whilst we're gathered together this week? Give you a chance to come off mute if you do.
Not really something to share, but maybe you could do us a favor and check with Mark, who mentioned in the chat that the CIRA managed to complete the audit to become a trusted partner of Mozilla and getting their DNS listed. I would be interested to understand a bit about his experiences on those processes behind. How long would it take to get this audited and stuff like that. So maybe just for the next meeting, or if you can find some material he can share, or if he would be willing to put something in writing. Because the initial thoughts we all got on this is that it could take pretty long. Taking into consideration that reading 57 PDFs took Mozilla half a year, that doesn't make me looking forward such processes in Mozilla could be done in a very short time frame, I would say.
Yeah, well, I'll certainly happily reach out to Mark, and I'm wondering if Glenn is raising his hand to also pick up on that, because I know Comcast is also a TRR participant, or whether it was an unrelated point, but unmute Glenn.
Unrelated. It's unrelated, Andrew. Can I go?
So just to conclude then, Andreas, I will reach out to Mark and see if he's able to share anything on our next call then. So yeah, that was a good question. Thank you. Yes. So with that in mind, Glenn, yeah, fire away.
Hey, just my usual nudge. ADD working group is coming up on IETF 111, and we have some really good work out there right now. We just had a drop about a week or so ago from was the DDR, and we have the excellent sort of comments ID that Barbara and Chris have put out there. So I really encourage everybody, please have a look at that and submit comments to the ADD list so that we can prepare ahead of time for a really good working session at the IETF meeting. And if you haven't seen we are tentatively on the schedule for Friday. So we're at the very end of the week when everybody's well rested and really focused. Fridays are the very best of the IETF.
Yeah, well, at least we haven't got to worry about catching planes, Glenn. Look on the bright side.
No planes or plagues.
Yeah, yeah, good point. Yes, it is imminent now, of course. It's only a few weeks away for IETF 111. So yeah, coming up very soon. And you remind me, I've got a question to raise on IETF 111 for Barbara in a moment. Before I do, Dave, do you want to also unmute?
Sure. I just had a quick question. Do you have any big plans for Treason Day? Are you going to be celebrating the 4th of July with your own special thank God they're gone, or?
Well, that would possibly be more upset last year, wouldn't it? With your, well, depending on your politics, I guess. It's all looking a little bit more boring now over your side of the Atlantic than it has been for the last few years.
Yes, in some ways that's true, but believe me, we've still got plenty of shit stirring going on over here. So,
as have we all, to be fair. By no means unique in that. To be honest, but yes, that is also coming up fast, isn't it? It's not that long to that day. Yeah. So, well, for those of you which in parts of the country where it's not too hot to be outside having parties and such like, I'm sure that will happen a lot. Well, let me shamelessly then move from that to going back to IETF 111 sort of. And observe if noting some of the discussion on the IETF mailing list over the weekend, if there's any opportunity for anyone with influence on the non-com process to perhaps try and reopen the nomination window for another week, that might be quite a good way of trying to get a bit more balance on the nominees. But I don't know if I think I've seen mixed views on the list as to whether that's something which is possible to do within the procedures or not. But as a sort of personal opinion, if it is, I think that would be a good thing to do. I'll leave Barbara to maybe take note of that, but I'm sure you have from the mailing list discussion anyway, Barbara.
I think I'll comment here on that.
You're a bit muffled, Barbara. I think you're trying to speak, but
I will comment on the IETF list, but on that topic.
Fair enough. Yeah, that would be good to see, to get an official view, because there's sort of mixed opinions at the moment as to what is procedurally allowable. So yeah.
But yeah, I mean, my personal recommendation to the current NOMCOM chair would be not to reopen, and I'll explain that.
Fantastic, thank you. Right, last call for anyone else with anything else you want to bring up. Just give you a moment. No, if not, thank you all for your participation today. I hope you found just some of those sort of summarized view of some of the responses to the TRR consultation of interest, and no doubt we'll come back to that certainly when Mozilla publish their official sort of conclusions, which hopefully won't be too much longer now before we see those. But with that in mind, have a fantastic week, everyone, and we'll speak again same time next week. So thanks all for your time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yes.